Primarily, our audience is the media, but we also welcome anybody who is willing to in knowledge that we want to discuss this morning. On this note, I welcome you once again. Fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Dr. A.J. Holmes. I'm sure a number of us here have read the budget or listened to discussions on it, and we might have one or two questions, we might have our own opinions, but today we'll be hearing from a seasoned economist who will be sharing with us what ISE's review of the 2024 budget statement is. So I would like to call on the director of ISA, Professor Peter Quartey, to do a presentation for us.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all, especially the distinguished panel members, as well as senior faculty from the university. Good morning and welcome. Today I have a new title, Seasoned Economist. Yes, we usually do this here. Okay, then we have Dr. Ralph Hammer. Yes, Ralph. Dr. Anama Santipoku, who just gave me a new title. Dr. Gloria Afomensa is from the Economics Department, as well as Professor Festus Ebo Texin. I don't know whether he's here. Ebo is part of the... Yeah, so that's the core team. Then we have the support, the admin staff, the communication, and all the support staff that help us to bring out this. So it's a collective effort. A brief outline of what I'm going to present in the next 40 to 50 minutes. As usual, we touch on the global economy. We've seen that growth is projected to fall. And for Sub-Saharan Africa, grow at 3.3% in 2023 and then 4% in 2024. World inflation is expected to decrease as well. Commodity price issues are still prevalent. Trade volumes decline, is likely to decline by end 2023. And we've seen many people falling into poverty as a result of all these global economic challenges that we are facing. Slower growth momentum expected within the Sub-Saharan African region. In Africa, we expect high interest rates and depreciated currencies. And I think we are witnessing this, although our hours exchange rate is fairly stable now, but we saw what happened in the beginning of the year. Same with inflation. Supply. Now, this is what I pick, a slide I picked from Ghana Statistical Service, clearly showing that about 23 districts have 50% of their populations being multidimensionally poor. Poverty in all its components, they are poor, and that is not good for us. If you look at the very red-colored map, the red part of the map, you see that most of these are in the northern regions. And most of this, if you link this to the Ghana Statistical Service inflation report, you find that inflation rates are above 50% in most of these areas as well. That certainly is not good, and we have to put in policies. We ought to grow between 8 to 10% per annum if we seriously want to reduce poverty and deprivation in the poor districts and the poor households that we find ourselves. So in looking at the budget, reviewing the budget, ask yourself whether we are doing enough to really affect the lives of the poor. If you want to see whether an economy is doing well, look at the lives of the poor, the bottom 20%. If you're able to affect them significantly, then you say your policy is working. Yeah, so I think I've spoken about the growth rates. That's we are projected to grow, and also some of the subsectors that are growing. Services, agric, driven mainly by services, and agric. Industry contracted by 2.2% the first half of the year, and it's mainly mining and quarrying. But if you drill down, you find that construction is also not doing so well, and so with manufacturing as well. But agric has been growing, been doing slightly better than before. This is just a teaser. I read in the budget that we are growing the economy by 1 trillion in 2024. And it's about 1.05 trillion actually from the budget statement. So I just wanted to play with the numbers. What does it mean? 1 trillion in the current exchange rate, it's about $83.7 million. If you look at 2017, the exchange rate was for 4.2%. So it means roughly we are growing from $52 billion to about $83 billion. That's our GDP is growing. But we have to look at other factors. We have to look at population growth rate. We have to look at many other factors, including poverty, etc. In the budget, there were some priority areas for policy intervention. We've seen the implementation of the IMF. I mean, we're trying to compare that to 2023. What were the policy options? So the IMF supported poverty reduction program, completion of the painful debt restructuring program, finalization of the growth strategy, leveraging climate financing, focusing on completing ongoing infrastructure projects, road infrastructure, rural electrification and telephone, complete the issuance of Ghana cards, promote peace and security, and then focus on the 2024 elections. What are the things that are going to be done to ensure that the Electoral Commission, National Commission for Civic Education, etc., are resourced so we will have a peaceful election. On the fiscal side, there is the policy, the commitment to ensure macro stability through fiscal consolidation. Now, the fiscal deficit of 4.9% of GDP has been recorded, and compared to a projected 4.6 for 2023, so it looks like it means we are not doing much of the consolidation as we have envisaged. But at least if we are around that figure, later on I'll show you some figures in terms of election years and the kinds of fiscal deficit we have run compared to what we have promised to do. You would see the disparity. In terms of revenue and grants, we are earmarked, or we've planned to increase our revenue by 31.7%. Then for grants, for domestic revenue, an increase of 31.9%. Total expenditure, an increase of 31%. And so interest payments, you will find to be increasing by over 60.3%. Why is that the case? Because in 2023, because of the debt negotiations and with the creditors and whatever, we have suspended paying interest on our debt in 2023. For quite a number of the debts, we are not paying interest. And therefore, if by 2024, hopefully by end December this year, we will know whatever agreements will come with the external creditors, then we will start paying interest. So it's like close to zero, no payment to a new regime where we are going to pay interest. That's why you're seeing a rise of about 60.3%. But the debt levels numbers will come down as a result of the restructuring. Now, debt GDP has moved to about 66% thereabout. So it tells you that the increase is basically because we have not been paying much of the interest like we used to do. We have suspended them for now. Again, revenue expenditure numbers, I would like you to look at on the bottom right. You see that we spend interest payment, we're going to spend about 32.3%, compensation 36.7%, statutory funds 21.2%. If you add this, it's over 90% of our domestic revenue is going to into these three. We have little left for capital expenditure, little left for goods and services, and many other things. So it tells you that the revenue that we mobilize is woefully inadequate to support our expenditures unless we borrow. That's why we always have this fiscal gap that needs to be filled. So again, if you look at the primary balance from 2022 to 2024, it tells you what we are witnessing now, a surplus compared to the deficit the previous year. Now, it then raises the question whether we can potentially break the infamous political business cycle, considering the way our revenue numbers are looking. Okay, so I think I've highlighted this, that we are missing the targets. Again, if you turn your attention to the bottom right, you'll find that our revenue and grants as a proportion of GDP is 2023, we budgeted 18%. We revised it to 15.8, and in 2024, we are saying 16.8 because we are missing most of the revenue targets, and therefore, government had to revise this target in 2024. Again, we'll find that about 90%, 99.3% of the deficit is going to be financed domestically. Bank of Ghana can no longer do so. In 2022, Bank of Ghana 23 did most of the financing. Now, within the IMF program, there is zero financing from Bank of Ghana. So all of this deficit is going to be accounted for or financed domestically. And how does government plan to do this? Through issuance of debt at the short end of the domestic market. That is why you see treasury bill rates going up every now and then, because government is limited. It only can borrow from domestic sources. But that is not good enough, because you're going to compete with the private sector. When you are borrowing, government is borrowing from the domestic sources, it is crowding out the private sector. You and I know that government is, or used to be, one of the safest borrower. After DDP, I think we are now a bit cautious now. But it's basically crowding out the private sector. So that we need to check. Otherwise, it's going to affect credit to the private sector, the extent to which private sector businesses can expand, and that does not augur well for production, for employment, and for livelihood. Now I turn to the issue of the political business cycle again. You would see the gap between our revenue and expenditure. Expenditure is the red line, then blue is our revenue. You see that business cycle. Then where we have the dotted line tells you when we had elections. So 2012 up to 2020, you see the deficit widening. So you have the table there that we try to compare the target and the actual. So you see 2020, there was some marginal deviation, but wasn't as huge. 2016, the target was 5.3, but we ended up with 8.7. That's the deficit. Election year, we missed the target by a very significant margin. Then 2012, I put an asterisk there because 2012 we were just about exiting from an IMF program. And yet, look at the target and look at the deficit, almost 12%. So the question is whether when we are on the IMF program, we will be able to minimize the deficit looks quite unsure, because 2016 we were under an IMF program, and yet we couldn't meet the deficit target. I mean, if you look at 2004, the same, 2000 is the same. So all tells you that there is a big challenge ahead of us, that during election years we create a mess, and then thereafter we try to clean this mess. I think I've spoken about the issue about the CAPEX, because we have a very tight budget. So in 2022, out of every CD that we collect in revenue, 56 pesos went into debt service. Then in 2024, we have projected that every CD we collect in revenue, 32 CDs will go into debt service. So about a third of our revenue is projected to go into debt service. If you pay compensation, wages and salaries, etc., which is also about a third or close to 40%, statutory payments, then we are left hanging. Okay, so again, on some of the fiscal measures, we've seen some reliefs. So we just try to put 2023 tax reliefs and then compared, or just so you can compare with 2024. So far, no new tax handles. In 2023, we saw VAT being increased, but 2023 VAT was increased. In 2024, we don't expect new tax handles as we had requested government to do. So happily, I think that is not happening. But some existing tax regimes to be reviewed. So review and expanding the environmental excise duty to cover plastic packaging, etc. Stamp duties, simplified tax return process, and then extended zero rate VAT on locally manufactured African prints for 2 more years, waive import duties on electric vehicles, import duties on vehicles imported by registered electric vehicle assembly companies, and then extended zero VAT on locally assembled vehicles, also zero rate VAT on locally produced sanitary parts, grant import duty waiver on raw materials for local manufacture of sanitary parts, as well as importation of agricultural machinery equipment, medical supplies, medical consumables, raw materials for the pharmaceutical industries, and then a flat rate of 5% to replace the 15% standard VAT on commercial property. So these are all reliefs that are going to help manufacturing, but just a smaller proportion of manufacturers, not all of them. So we have tried to categorize this into administrative revenue measures, direct tax measures, etc. It's the same thing I proposed, or I went through, so but there's a reclassification of these tax measures. Now, there's also expenditure measures that we are going to put in place. So the budget execution issues will come out, and we will save a lot of money if we undertake procurement audit. I've been told, reliably be informed, that the Auditor General is working on something like this, but I think it's long overdue. We need to work assiduously to ensure that we don't always raise revenue, but we also cut down on spending, wasteful spending. Otherwise, it's like you're holding a basket and you're pouring water into a basket. What happens? It will leak. So we need to seal the holes and ensure that we get value for money. Now, a few comments on that. We don't know how much we're going to raise on property rates. If you look at the budget, look at the appendix 2A to 2C or D. When it comes to property rates, there's zero. We're still not sure how much we're going to raise from property rate. It was previously collected by the assemblies. Now, Ministry of Finance has taken over, and to date, we are not sure how much we're going to rake in from property rates. One of the areas where we think there's a lot of opportunities to increase revenue, we are here to see. Road tolls, we're still missing this year We don't know the status to come back. But there's a lot of revenue being lost, and it doesn't promote public-private partnership because government alone cannot do it. So we need to revisit this ROTO issue. Exemption on local produce of sanitary parts. The idea is that those local industries will also have to produce enough. Otherwise, if they are not producing enough, we'll still continue to import, and the aim of the policy is going to be defeated. So we ought to enhance their ability to produce. Relief to domestic producers, agro-processing sector, there was nothing for agro-processing, and even the beverages sector, there was virtually nothing. Medical consumables, pharmaceutical industry, the flat rate of commercial property, I think that will introduce some efficiency in tax collection. So we move to the monetary and financial sector where we've seen inflation targets. So far, inflation has declined to about 35.2%, but a mid-year review budget says they are earmarking or targeting 31.3%. That will require some hard work to reduce inflation to acceptable levels. With 2024, inflation has been targeted at 15%, that is end of period inflation. And whether our usual political business cycle would enable us achieve this target. But of course, we need to manage expectations in terms of how much we expect in 2024. Because if we expect too much and we demand too much, government will have to spend, and we would have to have ourselves to blame. We have to clean some of the mess in 2025. So there's the need to manage our expectations as we move into 2024. But also, there's some investments that has been started, the road infrastructure, road networks, and rail networks. They certainly have to be completed. We cannot abandon them. A lot of investment has gone into that. So we really have to work hard on this. Still on the IMF and inflation, we just wanted to show to you the election years, actual inflation, government's targets, and you see clearly that in 2000, actually, we were under IMF program, the actual was 40.5%, government's target was 12.5%. 2004, again, under IMF program, 16.4 was the actual when the target was 10%. 2008, we were not, but our target was 8%. We ended up with 18.1. Then 2012, we were just about exiting from the IMF program, and that's why you see some good numbers close to the target. 2016, we were on the IMF program, and our target was 10.1, but we finished the year with 15.4%. So it clearly tells you that the IMF program is not the panacea to our problems. We have to do a bit more. Election years, if we don't have fiscal rules, we don't respect some of the rules, we'll still be under a program. And once we enter into the last quarter of the election year, that is when we start showing our true colors. Okay, so we'll then look at trade, issues of trade. Within the trade sector, we found there were very interesting development. We saw a trade surplus of about 2.0 billion in 2023. The surplus was also influenced our current account. Our gross international reserves dropped from 6.3 billion, that is 2.7 months of import cover, to 2.3 months of import cover. So in terms of trade, I think 2023 was slightly better. But there's something I want to share with you, which I took from the Ghana Statistical Service 2023 mid-year trade report, highlighting some intra-African trade, etc. we see that there is a need to produce more grains and meat products and minimize the imports to ensure exchange rate stability and lower inflation. I'll show you some numbers and you see why I am saying that. We need to promote intra-African trade. There's very little trade between Ghana and Nigeria, and even within East Africa. Last time I was told of an interesting story when Uganda has a lot of maize in abundance, and the price of maize is actually dropping. Farmers cannot cover even their cost of production. Kenya, on the other hand, their neighbor, is recording a deficit in maize production, and prices are escalating. But Kenya refuses to buy from Uganda. We say there is AfTA, as in African Continental Free Trade. One has surplus, the other has deficit. You have a deficit, and prices are increasing. The other has a surplus, prices are dropping. Yet we refuse to trade. We would rather import from Brazil or wherever. So that's the challenge we face. There's very little trade within the continent. Same with fertilizer. It will interest you to know that we produce a lot of fertilizer within Africa. Yet we import fertilizer from Brazil, from other places, and less of what we produce. And not until we promote intra-African trade, we'll be very vulnerable. Now, look at some of the things we export from the trade report. Cocoa products, we export 64.9%. It tells you how much we depend so much in terms of exports on cocoa. Then edible fruits and nuts, about 15.4. You can go on and on to animal and vegetables, to fish, etc. Then in terms of imports, cereal and grain products. Cereals and grains products, 22.8% of our imports are cereals and grains. It means we cannot feed ourselves when it comes to cereals and grains. We have to import. That tells you how vulnerable our economies are. Basic things like cereals and grains, meat, beverages, sugar, fish, and so on and so forth. So this is a wake-up call to us to try and produce more domestically. This is why we want to see more action. Planting for Food and Jobs 2.0, we want to see more action to promote some of these products so we produce more and be less vulnerable. Then, again, I borrowed this from Statistical Service during their recent launch. In terms of grains importation, about 37.4% is from Canada. Of the total amount of grains and cereals that we import, 37% is coming from Canada. Look at the distance from here to Canada. We are not importing from within the sub-region, but we go to Canada to import. Then about 10% from France, Turkey, and many others. Then meat, 20% from Belgium, 15% from Poland, 18.8% from Brazil. We go to South America, Brazil, to import. Cereals, we get quite a number from Vietnam. Vietnam is a poor country, but Vietnam is producing more rice, and we import from Vietnam. So it tells you, you can go on and see where some of these imports are coming from. Animal and vegetable fats and oil, Malaysia. Palm oil, we are told Malaysia started small, just like us. Today, we are importing 22.7% from Malaysia. This obviously tells us there is a lot to be done. Trade within Africa, we export 19.3% of our exports is to the African continent. And then we import 7.7% from Africa, 7.7. So it means almost 93 or 92.3% of our imports is outside Africa. And we speak about intra-African trade. I think there's a lot we can do there. Then export and imports within Africa by country. export quite a greater proportion. Of what we export, a greater proportion goes to South Africa, then Burkina Faso, 12.9, Cote d'Ivoire, 6.9, Togo, Mali, Niger. Our big brother, I thought Nigeria is so huge that we'll be doing a lot of business with Nigeria. Look at it, 3.6%. Very small. But I'm not too surprised because recently I met some officials from FAO and they said Nigeria is a very difficult country to trade with because every year they revise their trade policy. So it's a very uncertain market. But again, this is telling you what we are doing, and I think our 2024 budget, if you look at what the things we have put there, whether it's trying to address some of these issues. Imports, South Africa, 20.5%. Then Egypt, it tells you where we are also getting our products from. Nigeria, we get also 7.3. So we export very little. We export 3.6 to Nigeria, and we import 7.3 from Nigeria. It means we are getting more from them than we are actually selling to the bigger markets out there, Nigeria. We need to work on our trade policies. And then within ECOWAS, this is how we have performed. Within ECOWAS, 8.0, and then outside ECOWAS, 11.2. So trade, again, tells you that we are not doing the right things in terms of engaging the right persons. The real sector, agric, we expect some slightly higher growth rate within the agricultural sector in 2024. Although some projections, our budget is saying for the medium term is going to be 4.5. Sorry, slightly lower in 2024 compared to 2023, but the medium term is likely to be higher than we are seeing. Again, our Planning for Food and Jobs program, it's a very great policy, which we all have to support. But I pray that when it comes to implementation, we will do the right things, not involve political cronies, and then the outcome is not well achieved. So, as opposed to input credit, the PFJ 2.0 is going to provide, as opposed to subsidy, PFJ 2.0 is going to provide input credit, and I think that's the right way to go. It's going to prioritize commercial agriculture because small-scale agriculture will not help us. We need the large-scale commercial farmers, the value chain to pull along the small-scale farmers. Then the off-taker arrangement. Yesterday I heard somebody arguing against this off-taker arrangement. I didn't clearly get it, but this is what is going to be. So, on the whole, I think we need to direct some more investment and efficiency into agriculture value chain to ensure that we get the maximum out of this. In terms of industry, from the 2024 budget, we've seen a growth of 3.7 in 2024, and then 4.5% projected for the medium term. We think we're being overly optimistic about industry's potential because the incentives, I showed you the incentives we are giving to industry. I don't think it's far-reaching enough. So while we expect industry to grow at this pace, unless we put in more, otherwise we will not get the maximum benefit from industry. There are some specific tax reliefs. I think I went through some of them, as you've seen, just electric vehicles and assembly plants, sanitary parts, raw materials. But one thing we failed to do is to monitor these tax reliefs, tax exemptions. We grant exemptions, the firms and all the, come and promise to employ a certain number of people, produce so much, export so much, bring in so much foreign exchange. But who monitors to see that what they say they're going to do, they're actually doing them? There was a time we were trying to interview Chinese investors. So we went to GIPC and got a list of Chinese investment companies, firms in Ghana. When you call the number, it's a hairdressing salon. You call this, they have all changed. A lot of them have changed into all kinds of businesses because nobody is monitoring. They come in and then they end up into retailing, gari processing, all the things that the locals can do, illegal mining and all that. It's because you have relaxed, nobody monitors them. And I think we need to monitor all these tax reliefs so that we get value for money. There are several other interventions for industry, regulatory reforms to ensure transparency, crowding private financing through FDI and public-private partnership. So hopefully industry, if that works, industry would, We also recommend, of course, investment in complementary infrastructure, the influx of cheap imports, because when it comes to textile, we have had this zero-rated tax exemption since 2019, yet we have influx of imported cheap textiles. So again, if we don't curb some of these imports, the policy will not work. The sanitary pad issue, we have a very limited number of manufacturers of sanitary pads. So again, if you are not careful, we will not get the maximum benefits and we'll still rely on imports. Pharmaceutical industry, this will certainly improve competitiveness if what we have promised or proposed to do gets done. One area, again, as I mentioned, is the need to monitor. Because what we know is that some of these firms bring in semi-finished products. They don't start the actual manufacture. They bring in semi-finished products and then try and package them as manufactured items. So some of the toilet rolls that you see, some of the items that we see that they are enjoying tax reliefs, they are semi-finished products that they don't start from. It's when you start from the scratch, that is when you employ more people, that's when you add more value. But if we allow firms to bring in semi-finished products and still enjoy the tax reliefs, then it will defeat the aim of the tax policy or exemptions policy. Our services sector continues to be vibrant, projected to growth of 1.7 with a medium-term growth of 3.5%. It's finally expected to grow by 4.6 in 2023. And then in 2024, it is 1.9, but the medium term is projected to be 4.0. I don't know why we are less optimistic about the services sector, because that's one area that has great potential, as we have seen over the years. Its contribution to GDP is very high. Its growth rate is also quite significant. Look at the half-year growth rate. So I don't know why we are still projecting low growth rates for services. We need to invest more in the services sector. ICT still remains one of our best performers. The real estate sector is bouncing back. It's bouncing back because of the high rate of inflation. With high rate of inflation, I think last time I showed the real returns on treasury bills, on savings, on bonds, etc. It is negative. So why would you put your money in a bank and earn negative real return? You would put it in construction. That is why we see a lot of people constructing, putting up buildings for rentals, etc. So we've seen real estate bouncing because of the high rate of inflation and the negative real returns. But when things improve, I believe we would save more in financial assets, because we need that in times of emergency. You can fall on your financial assets quickly. You cannot turn some of this brick and mortar quickly into cash. It takes time. So when you are investing your money, don't put everything into brick and mortar. Even though there's negative real return, put some into financial assets. Right, so average monthly revenue from refurbished Kwame Nkrumah Park, we are told, has increased to 1 million compared to 3,000 cedis. It tells you what investment can do. If you invest in tourism, you invest in services, we are likely to obtain great returns. But then the challenges are the infrastructure issues, the challenges, potential challenges, implementation of long-term tourism plans are therefore very critical because we need to invest more. We need to have a tourism plan. We need to invest more. When you look at education, we are having enrollments of about 1.3 million students under the free SHS scheme and TVET. But then, because of the financial challenges, infrastructure, the double track has really gone down. Now things are slightly better, but still, I think we need to invest more in that. And there is a need to review the free SHS system. I think a lot has been said about this, and we need to look at that. National health insurance, there's been talk about enhancing the program to include dialysis and many other things, and make it more effective. The issue of people having a national insurance card and not being received in certain hospitals tells you that it's losing its effectiveness, and we ought to look at alternative funding mechanisms for health insurance. So I think some of the outlook includes the need to bolster tourism, investment in roads, in mining enclaves. The issue about kidney transplant, I think, has been discussed at length. And the issue of electric vehicles, development of the uptake of electric vehicles, we need a lot of stakeholder engagement, because if we have energy challenges and we want to use electric vehicles already, our supply is far less than our demand. We demand more energy than is being supplied. We're told we are not paying for our gas, and there's this, all the problems. So if we want to develop the use of electric vehicles, which is good, it's environmentally friendly, then we have to invest more in infrastructure. Solar, the sun is in abundance. We can invest in solar technology and be able to use more electric vehicles. So with tourism, the recommendation is to increase public-private partnership with electric vehicles, R&D in alignment with international and regional best practices. Roads, there are quite some roads that have been left abandoned. I think we need to ensure that that is done carefully. The health issue, the dialysis I mentioned, they need to look at that, availability, affordability, and treatment in Ghana. We need to look at that. Then National Electronic Pharmacy. There's a platform deployed to improve access of medicines. But there's a need for increased awareness, because I don't think many of us know of this National Electronic Pharmacy, how it operates, and how our rural folks can even access this very useful service. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll try and conclude, and then we'll have discussions thereafter. Ghana's economy has shown signs of recovery, likely to grow at about 3%, but they need to grow more. 8 to 10% is what we propose, because if you really want to touch lives of the poor, who we said are multidimensionally poor, about 50% in about 23 districts, over 50%, poverty rate of over 50%. That is quite alarming, and we ought to work on that carefully. Interest payments is likely to increase, as I showed you, but then compared to 2023, because we are not paying, you see a quantum jump of about 60.3%. But again, it's still high though, given that about 32 pesos of every cedi that we collect in revenue will go into debt service. That is on the high side. Then you find that every domestic revenue we raise, we're going to raise in 2024, interest payments will take 32 pesos, compensation will take 37 pesos, statutory payments will take 21 pesos, leaving very little for capex and goods and services. That is why we're going to have deficit financing. And now, Bank of Ghana cannot finance our deficit. How are we going to finance this? Government has to raise treasury bills, bonds. That is going to escalate the interest payments and crowd out the private sector, which is key to our growth and employment. So we should expect this will happen, and that will not augur too well for us. The revenue targets are being missed, and therefore we are witnessing some conservative figures in terms of our revenue GDP numbers. We need to broaden the tax base. We've been saying this all the time. We are trying with property rates. Up to now, we can't evaluate the new property rate system that have been put in place. So hopefully, maybe property rates and some of the non-tax revenue measures will help us. Let's look at the informal sector, the artisans. Some of them earn more than those informal employment, but they don't pay taxes. A lot of informal activity. In fact, our informal sector is over 60 to 70% of our economy. And they don't pay taxes. So we are just taxing the very few. If we don't find a way of roping them in, then we'll continue to have these challenges. If somebody wants passport, you can ask for a tax clearance certificate. If it's in an informal sector, then there's, pay something before you get your passport. I think we can institute a few measures to ensure that the informal sector will be roped in. Luckily for us, we have a Ghana card, which is able to capture so many people, know where they are and what they do. We should be able to tax them. Our expenditures is projected to increase by 31%. I don't think we should continue increasing expenditure on a yearly basis. Once we're able to undertake procurement audit, we will save the taxpayer a lot of resources. I don't think we are having value for money for some of the procurements that we are seeing. It's about time we change this. The tax reliefs proposed is a good signal. I mean, we have made noise about sanitary pads, we have made noise about agri inputs, medical consumables, etc. That is good. But this should be monitored, as I mentioned, to prevent abuse and to justify the rationale for the release. Ladies and gentlemen, breaking the political business cycle in 2024 is a test case. It is really a test case in the sense that given what we have been through, the painful domestic debt exchange program and all the wahala we've been through, I don't think 2024 we should behave the same way we behaved in 2020 or in previous election years. We have learned our lessons the hard way, and I think if we don't learn or we don't apply the lessons learned in 2024, then I'm afraid we have no hope. There's a need to boost intra-African trade, curb the excessive imports, and Bank of Ghana, in my view, should prioritize how it spends its foreign exchange. There are some imports that are unnecessary. We should move away from some of these imports. These intestines and all the, I hear they call it, what's the name? Why do we import all of this? Yesterday they were interviewing some people in Kumasi, and they said they didn't even know these things were imported. The chop bar operators were saying they don't taste better than the local ones. So why do we use hard-earned foreign exchange to import some of these items when we can? I think there's the need for regulation. Don't stop them, but don't give foreign exchange. Our hard-earned foreign exchange should be channeled towards the priority areas. I think that is very important. What we should know is that when we do that, we are creating jobs for those countries. But they are producing, they are exporting to your country. If you go and buy, there's no production happening in your country. You are rather creating jobs, and our unemployment situation would worsen. We also remain vulnerable because if we become so dependent on such countries for imports, whatever happens there, when they cough, we catch a cold. Whatever happens there affects us. We ought to be self-reliant. Yes, there's a need to trade, but trade in the goods that you cannot produce. You don't have the comparative advantage. Let's reverse our dependence on food imports. And of course, I've mentioned about the need to invest in the tourism sector, a review of this aspect of the free SHS, Stored infrastructure projects that require funding, due to the funding challenges, should be addressed. Hopefully, by first week of December, all things being equal, if the IMF board signs the, signs of approves our program, then the second tranche will come. And I recommend strongly that part of this should go into resolving some of the infrastructure bottlenecks or untackled projects, abandoned projects that we have in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not the least is the point that the budget provides some critical policies and programs that will help accelerate growth. However, we're expecting additional incentives for industry, especially tax reductions, even if marginal, for food and beverage producers. And that will be a very welcome idea. Last time I showed you how much tax we have put on food and beverages, sometimes close to 100%. And that is what is also fueling the inflation. So lastly, I leave with a message that 2024 is really a test case. We need prudent financial management to build on the relative stability we have recorded in 2023. On the contrary, if we spend excessively, it will bring dire consequences on the economy. Our exchange rate will fluctuate rapidly. Our inflation rate will hit the roof. And we will use the next 3 or so years to clean the mess. I think we should break from this cycle and learn from the bitter lessons of the domestic debt exchange program and the reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Quartey, for the insightful presentation. Before we get to the Q&A section, I would like to acknowledge the presence of a few personalities here. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Martha Awo, who is the head of the social division at ISA, and then Professor Charles Aka, who is the head of the Statistics and Survey Division. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Abner Oduro. We are very grateful to have you here. And Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, Executive Director of IDEG. Thank you very much for coming. And also other faculty members in the university and then senior members of ISA. Our students, thank you so much for coming. I hope all of us have picked up a few points from the presentation. I know we have some questions, so we will do the questions in about 3 rounds. So the first round will take about 3 questions per round. Just lift up your hand. Someone will bring a microphone to you. And before you ask your question, please introduce yourself. Let us know your name. And if you're coming from any media house, wherever you're coming from, let us know. Would also like to acknowledge the presence of our online participants. You can put in your questions in the chat box, and we have someone monitoring the chat box, so we would answer your questions. Would also like to thank our sponsors, Agricultural Development Bank and Stanbic Bank, for helping to make this program a success. Thank you so much. So questions now. Are we sure we have no questions? I'll be very surprised.
Kingsley Asare, Ghanaian Times. Prof called for alternative funding for the national health insurance. I want him to give us areas he think we can raise more funding for the scheme. What are the alternatives he is suggesting? Thank you.
My name is Winston Taki of Metro TV. By the budget presentation, you indicated that you actually revealed that there will be no space for capex and goods and services, especially in terms of expenditure in 2024. Yet, we've seen a lot of projects that the government is embarking on. And with that being said, we've also seen in the construction sector. Going in 2024, we know that political-wise, governments or political parties always act. Here is whether, in the face of we paying debt, are we to experience any growth at all in 2024? Will we experience any growth at all in 2024, looking at where we are?
Good morning. My name is Michael Obodu with TV3. Prof, we know that the relative stability we've seen with the local currency has been because of the halt in the payment of our external debt. I'm sure we've made some progress with securing some agreements with our external creditors. How bad should we expect the currency to begin to perform once we resume that? Government has touted its efforts with stabilizing it, but we all know it's some sort of a facade once we begin paying. So how bad could it get? And what would be that ripple effect, especially on growth and the general economic performance? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for these brilliant questions. But I think when I started, I showed a list of people who contributed towards this presentation. I have stood and spoken for almost 50 minutes. So you would appreciate it if I pass on the microphone to some of my colleagues to also express their views on the issue. So what I'll do is I'll just pick one and then pass on the rest to my colleagues to basically address the issues. And I'll settle on the last one, relative stability in the dollar, the currency. Yes, because it's also due to the fact that we have suspended debt payment, but that is not all. We also realize that once we sign on to an IMF program, confidence in the economy resumed. And we've even seen that the rating agencies even didn't downgrade us, but we were slightly upgraded. So that alone brings some confidence, attracts FDI, attracts investment, at people's forex, etc. Will flow in. So yes, there will be some depreciation, but not as significant as it did in the past. And therefore, all things being equal, I can assure you that we will not record excessive depreciation in the currency, despite the fact that we are going to spend 32 pesos of every CD we raise in revenue to finance debt. There will be some relative stability in the rate of depreciation. Thank you. Professor Sakoto, where is he? I see. Yeah, so there are others around. Charles.
Okay, let me try. I think there was a question on CAPEX. And so actually what we saw over time is that we are not spending enough on capital expenditure, which is actually very critical. If you look at countries that have performed, the now industrialized countries, if you look at the budget, the priority of a government is to try to expand the productive capacity of the country, i.e. to invest in the sectors that could employ and use resources in the country. So in almost all the now developed countries, East Asian countries, they will spend 8 to 10% of the total government expenditure on infrastructure or on development expenditure. We are doing quite very small. And if you look at the revised budget for 2023, the amount that was earmarked for capital expenditure was underspent. Okay, so that is one of the problems I have for those that call for government to reduce expenditure. I think the discussion should not be government to cut expenditure, but for government to rationalize or to reallocate or to gain efficiency, i.e. to save expenditures from frivolous areas and to be invested in more productive areas. And whenever we say government should cut expenditure, and as IMF is calling, and many journalists are asking, this or the corporate will always be the productive expenditures which we actually need. Government did not cut expenditure on goods and services. They actually overspent goods and services because that's where the corruption is and that's where they need the money. And IMF didn't say anything. But then they cut expenditure on CAPEX. And as we are going forward, you're going to see that CAPEX is still going to be cut, which means that all the infrastructure projects you are seeing, unless the private sector is going to, they will not be completed. And you see the deteriorations that we are seeing in our roads. If you see one of the other expenditures, social expenditure was cut. What government budgeted for subsidies, 350 million was for subsidies, and was supposed to subsidize petroleum products so that when we go to the pump, we could buy cheap gas. Despite the inflation and the increases at the pump in electricity, gas, water, almost every month, government still underspent. They spent less than 20 million out of the 350 million that was budgeted for subsidies, to have subsidized product, because when we say cut expenditure, they'll cut the one that will not really affect them. So I think we need to begin to have a conversation on what are the expenditures that we think are frivolous, what are the expenditures that are inefficient, that need to be reallocated so that we can gain efficiency. And that's what needs to be spent in infrastructure, CAPEX, agriculture, and manufacturing. That's what I will say about that. There was a question on growth, whether we are going to grow at all. I think we need to have a discussion again about what is our long-term objective. In the coordinated program for social and economic development policies, government committed to grow the economy 2017 to 2024 an average of 7%, and that was what middle income economy was supposed to sustain if we have the aim of joining the upper middle income economies. We have not been able to do that. And since COVID came, we are now hovering around -1, and now we are talking about possibly achieving 3% or 2.8, according to the government. That's GDP. The population is growing at nearly 3%, about 2.something%. So what is actually important for us is not GDP growth, it's GDP per capita. Okay, so as more children are being born, you always need to divide the GDP by the population. So which means that GDP per capita is actually going to grow around 1%. Okay, instead of looking for about 7%. So we are basically not growing, we are stagnant. And if that continues to 2025, 2026, 2027, we are compromising our ability to reduce poverty, to create jobs, and to join the upper middle income country. Actually, we need it to take about 3 to 5 more decades at that level of growth if you were going to be able to join an upper middle income country. GDP per capita, even with the 1 trillion that the government is talking about, if you divide it by 33 million people, It's still around 2,600 US dollar per capita. Malaysia is around 12,000 per capita. Korea is about 30,000 per capita. So we're still a poor country. Okay, so we need to grow. And every investment in the productive sector that will cause us to generate, as Director is saying, at least 7 to 10% GDP growth on a sustained level for about 10 years is what will make us prosperous. And compromising growth because of fiscal consolidation or stability or macroeconomic stability, for me, is a discussion we need to have. What is the objective? Is it full employment? Is it growth? Is it poverty reduction? Or is it just to have a low inflation and to have exchange rate stability? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Aka. There was a question on other funding for national health insurance. Dr. Feni. Thank you, Dr. Feni.
You know, I heard the CEO of the NHIA lament that the premium we're paying for NHIA is so low compared to Kenya. In Kenya, they pay so much, they invest into endowment and other things, and they're able to provide better quality services. Over here, how much premium do you pay? Ask yourself. Is it 1 CD or something? It's 40 CDs or so. I'm hearing 22 CDs. For the Senate contributor, 22 CDs. Then if a non-Senate, 40 CDs or something. But just imagine 40 CDs. If you buy just one coatem, and most people are likely to get malaria at least once a year. So just one coatem, it's not even up to to pay for a coatem one. It tells you that we are underfunding the national health insurance. So alternative funding arrangement, one could be we increase the premium and also set up an environment where we provide a levy and invest and utilize such funds. There could be several options. The private sector could come in to support. And I believe when we call on the private sector, and they are very much sure that the monies will be put to good use, they will make some contributions. The banks can make contributions, and some financial institutions can make contributions. So I think we need to work on the national health insurance scheme. In other jurisdictions, in fact, private health insurance is very small. It is the public sector health insurance that most people use. Goes to most of the private sector, the banks, etc. It's rather the private health insurance that is being used most of the time. And I think we need to have a dialogue and see how we rope them in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is our last round of questions.
I think I have a few couples of questions to Prof. And thank you for also organizing such a wonderful program to educate us. Prof, may I know, in your presentation, you talk about the 2024 budget that was presented on the 15th of November. You said it could have been good if government have given some tax reduction to business community. But you said no matter however marginal it could be. I was unable, I didn't get it right. We couldn't pinpoint to say this area of the taxations, if government had reduced it to this percentage, E or B. I think before the 2024 budget, there was a mid-year budget review in 2023, which saw an introduction of the sustainable growth taxes. That is the three taxes that was presented. And profit before tax or so, from the business community, which we were looking at it in the 2024 budget, that at least the tax rate that was introduced there was quite worrisome, and maybe in the 2024 budget, if government could have reduced some of the rate for us. To you as a professional and expert, what do you think government should do about these three new taxes that was introduced in the mid-year budget review, budget 2023 mid-year budget review? To me, where I sit as the Import and Export Association of Ghana, we're also much concerned about the COVID levy. The COVID levy, the special import levy, 2%. It used to be 1% and 2%. In 2017, first maiden budget, we saw the government abolishing the 1%. Fast forward, COVID came, and that 1% was brought back. So it was the 1% that was actually abolished in 2017 budget, and the 2% was left that after some collection, it will go off as we speak, which is a sunset clause. That special 2 import levy is still running concurrently, including the COVID levy that we were asking that is go off the books. Then in 2023 mid-year budget review, we saw the introduction of the upfront tax, 2.5% upfront tax at the port. However, any importer that brings in cargo into this country pay an import duty plus an upfront tax of, it used to be 12.5 VAT, but in 2023 budget review again, they introduced another 2.5, making it 15% flat rate. So as of now, if you import cargo to the port and you are paying an import duty, you will also pay a 15% upfront tax. Then you pay another 2.5% upfront tax. I don't understand how many times, because that 15% input tax that you've collected from the port, if I come to make sales and I do not go back to file, government hold that money. Yet government still says we are introducing additional 2.5 VAT. I don't know, is it a double way of taxation, and how it's lumping on each other? I don't get it. I think we need some education. And will you agree with me that there is a need for currency board to be established in our Bank of Ghana than the current dispensation where we have the monetary committee will only go and say, because of prime rate, early this year, 2023, March thereabout, we moved the 14.5, 17.4 or so, 14.5 prime rate to 17%. And the reason was that it was to curtail the inflation. Yet, we saw where inflation took us to and where we are now at 35.2%. Yet, when you go to the market or to our banks, interest rate is still running higher. Last but not the least, there's a law in Parliament called LI 2023. I don't know if you heard it. The conversation gets regarded, and in your presentation, you made mention of the Yamadia. That's where the Yamadia issue came from, that there is a need for us to curtail some of the excessive importations of, be it rice, vegetable oils, tomato paste, and what have you. From where I sit as the executive secretary, we met the ministry at the time they were preparing this policy, and said, in principle, we agree that spending $160-something million for importation of these things, we need to do something about it. But in terms of rice importation, if you look at wherever we are bringing the rice, the Vietnam and other area that you've made mention, they have the infrastructure there. What are the infrastructure? Silos to store the rice and so that it can meet the quality of it. And then we also have the processing plant right away sitting in the farm lands where when they do the harvest and then straight to the processing plant. In Ghana, I can cite one example in Tamale, the Avenas rice, Avenas mill, is sitting somewhere in Tamale. Then Yakaba Koburi is where we can find the major rice producers. Then we don't have the processing plant there. So we said there's a need for government to look into the infrastructure first. Processing plants will be close. You go to Avehem Rice, which is very close to here. I'm not quite sure you go to Avehem Rice and see any of the processing plants sitting within that area. and or there's silos that we can after harvest it. Because the rice that we are consuming, you and I are consuming now, is not just 3 months ago harvest that they are bringing from Vietnam. Probably 1 year, 10 years, 4 years, 5 years. Because, but the starch and the quality, we can still see it, is as a result of they have this infrastructure put in place. So let us work on the infrastructure first before we can talk about, and of course, those companies or those individuals who have expressed the interest to go into rice production and other things, I'm not sure if one of them has even put something on the ground. So preparation is not just 1 year. So after getting the LI, there's a need for a country to say, okay, we will implement it in step by step. At least, if this rice, we bring in rice of over 800,000 metric tons into this country. Our growers, what metric tons do we have at hand? In every year, what effort will we put consecutively to say we will be increasing 200,000 metric tons continuously, maybe for the next 4 years or for the next 5 years or 6 years. Then there we can then talk about, okay, we are self-sufficient, then we are banning. But to say outright, I don't know what is your thinking? Do you admit or agree to government that immediately the LI passed through, they should go ahead to ban it totally outright? Because I'm thinking at the food insecurity that will hit all of us. Last but not least, the after. I'm happy that you made mention of after. And you gave us, even Nigeria here, how much we are trading with them. And you made Kenya, I think you mentioned Kenya in another country, where there's much surplus of maize, but there's another country that is lacking. Yet that country wouldn't want to go there and buy. So even in after, we are not well prepared. Even as a country, the secretary is sitting here. I am not quite sure if you go to my village in Kusinaba and ask the farmer there that what are the things that we are under after? What can we produce here so that we can also get opportunity on the aftermarket? Even in our local dialect, Prof, the farmers are not, the people are not aware. SMEs, I don't know how well equipped they understand after. So there's a need for us to do more conversation in this area so that at least as a country we can also benefit. Other than just having only the hosting the secretariat here, and at the end of the day, we are not benefiting. The cost of utility tariff is another point that for the manufacturing aspect that you talk about. Thank you very much. These are just my initial questions.
Okay, let me address them, and then whilst we're prepared to take one or two more. Yes, for the tax reduction, I said even if marginal, there are some, last time we launched our State of Ghanaian Economy Report and we look at the review, we reviewed the third quarter performance. I presented a table where food and beverage manufacturers, you saw the price, you saw the tax, and then the final price. And we thought for some, about 100%, price doubles after the price has doubled. That is why I was asking that at least there should have been some marginal reduction in some of the taxes out there. You pointed to the COVID levy. COVID is gone. Not gone completely, at least still have COVID, pockets of COVID, but not to the extent we were facing the challenges and how to put in infrastructure, ventilators, and all of that. So why do we still have that levy? Is when you clear your goods from the port, last time I did so, in fact, like a whole page, this levy, then that levy, then about a series of levies and taxes, and so by the time you add the levy, and it's so huge, you know. I know we are in a situation where we want to increase revenue. We are in a system where our revenue is much, much lower, and yet our expenditure is so high. Just like Professor Aka said, if we want to cut expenditure, there are some critical areas we don't touch. But I believe that if we should follow the recommendation of performing a procurement audit to avoid rationalize our spending, we don't necessarily have to always increase taxes or raise revenue. We can give some tax reductions and enjoy some reliefs or enjoy some benefits of having to undertake some procurement audit. So expenditure rationalization will help us to cut some of the taxes that we have imposed on petrol and many other areas. Then the issue about Bank of Ghana, the currency exchange, currency board, that was a colonial policy. Bank of Ghana is not just there to regulate the currency. There are other things it does to ensure price stability, exchange rates, inflation, and all the others. Our problem that we are facing on the exchange rate on inflation is a fiscal problem. If we didn't spend so much, if we didn't borrow too much, if we didn't run so huge a deficit, Bank of Ghana wouldn't have a lot of work to do. So I believe they are doing what they have to do, but let's address the fiscal issues, and the monetary wouldn't be too much of a problem. But if we are having huge deficit and government has to borrow from the domestic market and offering higher interest rates, you and I have to borrow at high interest rates. So those are some of the inherent challenges. Let's address the fiscal problem. The fiscal is one of our major issues. Then LI 2023, yes, I've heard the minister speak about getting this LI through so we rationalize our import regime. Some of the things we import, I believe, locally, we can manage with what we have. These intestines, do we need to? I think we have a lot of meat and other poultry products here. If intestines you want, they are cattle and all the, we can get them here. So let's rationalize. Rice, we are producing rice, but not enough. So if we want to roll out a policy to restrict importation of rice, it has to be a phased approach. If the LI is passed, it has to be a phase, gradually roll it out and grow our domestic market. Otherwise, we will have problems. And I think I agree with you about the awareness. Not many people even know the opportunities, the commodities that if we come together and export, where do we send them to? What are the channels? What are the benefits? I think we need to do more education on that. Thank you. So, yes.
So, a brief addition on the rice and silo issues. I believe Ghana is taking baby steps towards improving the infrastructure arrangements for rice production and storage. And in fact, in the last 5 years or so, I think we've added additional 80,000 tons storage across the district under the one district, one warehouse. But what is more important is that putting up warehouses does not mean you have what it takes to store. The managerial skills is lacking, and arrangements around how we are going to use those warehouses is not very clear. So as we build these warehouses, we also need to be clear about who is going to manage them. Secondly, we've also been able to put up some of the processing plants. Unfortunately, the farmers who would bring these paddy rice for processing are also engulfed with debts. So if I have debt owed to women in Alaba, and you put a rice processing plant in Agona, I will still not take my rice there because already I owe somebody and I have to take my rice to them. So currently, there are rice processing plants which cannot mobilize enough rice for processing. So as we look at the plants, we also look at the supply chain at the farmer level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. J. Holmes. So we'll take our last two questions.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Johnson Adam. I'm a student. Prof, in the recommendation, as part of the recommendation, we stated that, even you said it a bit in an attempt to answer Ms. Awinkovic, that education should be part so that we shape the minds of Ghanaians concerning preference for foreign goods. My question is it really about educating the ordinary Ghanaian about imported goods? Because you outlined some of the effects that we will have as a country if we continue to make importation. Is it not about policy decision at the macro level and a deliberate policy at the domestic level to also enhance domestic production? Because an ordinary Ghanaian will go to a market and will choose from the available products over there. And so if there is a deliberate policy to sort of curb the importation, we have no option than to choose from what is available domestically. So is education enough for that?
Hello. Good morning. Sorry. My name is Evans Abaka, and I have a question regarding the dialysis. I realize that government's focus is on making the equipment available for treatment. But we can all recall that this is something that has become a huge national issue. And so I am thinking that if it has gained attention in the budget, which is a one-year budget, apart from making the equipment available, how can the government also incite research, education, or institute measures that can help address the incidents downwards? Because what happens if the incidence increases more than our capacity to treat those who have it? So I don't know how we can advise government or ensure that there are structures that are helping to strengthen systems instead of just making the equipment available. Thank you.
Okay, Kingsley, mine is on expenditure. In your submission, you stress the need for us to rationalize our expenditure, and Professor Aka even called for a national discussion on our expenditure. I want to ask from Issa, what specifically expenditure lines do you think should be rationalized? What areas do you think we should critically look at in terms of reducing expenditure? And secondly, overall, how would Issa describe the 2024 budget? Is it austere? Is it ambitious? Is it expansionary? How would you describe it? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Director said I should attempt the expenditure question. I think that's why I said we should call for a national conversation. But I think some of the conversations started long ago by the media and even ISA. I remember when this government came to power, they appointed a number of ministers. Some of us said the size of government was too much. And we began to ask for a review. Some of those ministries have been removed, and others have been combined, and others are still there. The Constitutional Review Commission, I think they are beginning to discuss whether we need even deputy ministers. So that discussion is still going on. When we have opportunity to contribute to the revision of our Constitution, do we need deputy ministers? What is the optimal ministers do we need? What is the optimal size of parliament? Does government need to guarantee loans to parliamentarians to buy 4x4s? Is that what they do about all of those discussions? We need to continue to have. So I don't think ISA can begin to list what should go and what should not go. But we as Ghanaians, we who vote government to power and our MPs, we have to begin to demand. I think one of the places where we spend a lot of money is our democracy. Our government, if you look at the allocation of budget and see what goes to the Jubilee House, for example, and what goes to our politics, it's quite expensive, but that's not the only area. We've talked about reviewing the free SHS. Look at the amount of money, almost 3 billion or so. So do we still want to have free SHS like the way it is when people are willing to pay? Okay, can we have a review of that policy? So those are discussions we need to continue to have. We are talking about national health insurance. How much should individuals be willing to pay as premium versus how much government pays? All those discussions, I think, need to go on. But really, what government needs is to invest in public goods, which are the ones that we're talking about health, in particular, education and infrastructure. And if we spend much of our money in paying wages and salaries, servicing debt, look at how much we use in paying interest on loans that have been borrowed. Quite a lot, more than even what we pay on wages and salaries or compensation. So we need to have a debt policy. Do we need to still borrow so much and be committing about 50 billion cedis or so in servicing debt? So these discussions, and what are the alternatives if we don't borrow? Where do we get the money? So domestic resource mobilization, again, taxing property raise and government, GRA being willing to raise taxes from the informal sector so that we don't depend on borrowing from everywhere, and then now, because we have to pay a lot of interest, we cannot do the basic things that will make the economy prosperous and productive. So I think that's a little I will say about that. I think all Ghanaians have to contribute to that debate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But just to add to what Charles has just said, rationalize expenditure, wages and salaries. We have employed so many people who are pretending to be working, and we're also pretending to be paying them. So if you look at the wages, salaries we're paying, it's very, very low, and they're always complaining, but we have the numbers. In the private sector, we do performance evaluation, annual performance reviews, etc. Because in economics, we say your wages should match your marginal productivity. We don't do a lot of that. We try that with the salary scheme. What's the name of this? Single spine. You know, productivity. But we don't do this regularly. We don't really match people's wages to their productivity. So there's a lot of, I won't call it waste, but a lot of unproductive labor force that we have engaged, and we are paying so much in that area. If we do this review, you can reallocate them into other areas where they will be much needed, and that will enhance output, it will enhance revenue. But our public services are choked with all kinds of people who are pretending to be working, and we're also pretending to be paying them salaries. But government appointees, if we can be honest with ourselves, some of these appointees can be rechanneled into other areas where they will be more useful. So I believe when it comes to cutting down on expenditure, there are several areas we can do so. And I've also mentioned the case of the procurement, that if we're able to do proper procurement audit, we'll be amazed. Just pick one sector: health, education, roads. Just run, a procurement audit, and I'm sure you'll be celebrating the outcome, and you'll be surprised to see some of this. And so I think there's a lot of room for us to cut down on expenditure. The issue about dialysis, and I'm not a health expert, but I can tell you that equipment alone is not a solution. We've seen tax relief for consumables. So that's one way by which you can, all the consumables, if they are imported, at least the cost will come down. But there is the need for education, lifestyle education. If we don't educate people to live healthy, to exercise, to eat healthy, we'll end up, it may come, but there are things we can also do. We need to educate ourselves. And even our market women, there's barely anything you buy that is not adulterated. You buy palm oil, there's something colored somewhere. You buy meat, it's colored. You buy Whatever we buy, you buy groundnut paste, something in there. You buy hot grounded chili, it looks very red. There's something added, you know. And even Galamsey, this illegal mining, the mercury and all the things, all of this has effect on our health. So not just providing the equipment, but education, our lifestyle would go a long way to minimize some of these diseases or that we face. I think, was there any other preference for foreign goods? Yes, you are right. It's not just about a ban, but a policy to encourage local production is very important. But also, the awareness is also important. When you know that what I'm doing, if there is the alternative, no matter how, whether slightly expensive, or sometimes even the things we buy, they are of cheaper quality. The price is low, but the quality is bad. Some of the electrical equipment, electrical cables, you buy them, the next time your house is on fire. Electrical gadgets, radio, Sony, you see Sony, all kinds of things. And we buy them. You use it once, twice, it blows. I think we also have to be educated. We also have to be responsible citizens. When we started the Friday wear, it's caught up. Now, the consumption of African prints has shot up considerably, although some are printed in China and sold locally. But at least a national conversation, policy, awareness, etc., will make us consume local goods and minimize the importation. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been made aware that we have a question online. Can you please read it out for us? And that will be the last question we are taking.
My question from Dorcas Enyonam, I read, can you assist with how the government can make savings on the CAPEX through managing overinflation of government projects? I take it again. Can you assist with how the government can make savings on the CAPEX through managing overinflation of government projects?
Yeah, I got your question. Thank you very much. It's a very useful question you have raised. And it goes back to my point about procurement. If we are to audit some of the roads, some of them are termed election roads. They construct them after elections, then it deteriorates. Yeah, in my area where I live, there's a beautiful asphalt road. Now, it developed into bumps, like huge bumps. And some of them, if you are driving a saloon car and you try to go on it, you get stuck. You cannot move. You see asphalt. Asphalts are very expensive. It tells you that some of these things we do, the contractors know. They do shoddy work, they get paid, and they disappear. But if we are to do this audit that I'm talking about, that will go and check, you have constructed a road, you tell me it has a lifespan of 10 years, and within 2 years, it had developed manhole. Come back, or you jail them. If we are serious with some of these things, I believe our CAPEX expenditure will reduce, and we will be able to do more, construct more roads with very little money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All too soon, we've come to the end. We've had a very good discussion. I would like to call Mrs. Vicentia Quote to come and give us the vote of thanks. Oh, okay, before Vicentia comes, Prof. Osu, we have a special request from Director. He wants you to say something.
Just to say that I agree with everything. And I think that the final analysis is a political framework problem. How much do undergraduates pay here in tuition? You're not going to like me saying this. How much? $200 a year? When it's about $50,000 outside. This is part of the problem. Suppose that the government decided to reduce the expenditure on education by proposing that you pay more tuition. Would you go along with that? Or would you go on demonstration? This is part of the problem. And therefore, the government will be very reluctant about reducing the expenditure. And this is a situation also where we end up with excess supply of graduates, but there's not enough complementary fiscal capital to absorb the excess supply of graduates. Is this an efficient policy? It is not. I can go on and on. When the government decides to create a bunch of so-called regional universities all over the place, and not enough funding to produce the kind of quality of education that all of us need and want. So as we think about these issues, I think we should expand our minds in thinking about the political framework. There's nothing wrong with the democratic process. That's not what the problem is. But there's something wrong about decisions by the government that are controlled by their expectation of wanting to get re-elected and maintaining power and authority in the country. And this is the kind of national dialogue that you should be having. Mr. Director, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Asante Poku. Thank you so much for moderating the event so skillfully. We are grateful. I'd like to start by thanking the director for the very informative presentation he gave us, standing for all this time to educate and inform us. We are grateful. I'd like to thank the heads of division at ISE, Prof. Charles Aka, Prof. Isaac Otayakoto, Dr. Martha Awo, for being here and for supporting the success of today's event. We'd like to thank our experts at the economics division. Like the director said, the presentation is the joint effort of the division, so we thank every member of the economics division. We also thank the supporting divisions for their contributions. We'd like to thank our media representatives. Like was said at the beginning, this event targets the media and all other concerned citizens of Ghana. So we thank our media representatives for turning up in your numbers as you do every time. Our participants, without you, wouldn't have had the success we've had today. So we thank everyone who made time to be here with us today. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues, my seniors, all staff of ISE for your continued support in helping us put together these events. We are grateful. We thank everyone for being here. Thank you all for coming. Please, before I step down, just a few announcements. We'll have media interviews right here in front. So our reporter should kindly come up for us to do it quickly, and then we'll be out of here. Thank you. Okay. Please, we have refreshments arranged as usual, so on your way out, make sure to pick something along with you. Thank you. Or please, let's give ourselves a loud round of applause. Thank you.